Hello everyone, this is Dr. Leila Galban, and today I'm gonna talk about grammar and meaning. Okay, here we go. Last time we talked about a linguistic study of meaning, and we said that there are a number of sciences which study meaning. For example, we have talked about lexical semantics, which studies meaning of words and relations between these meanings, and lexical relations such as synonymy, hyponymy, antonymy, homonymy, homophony, and so on and so forth. And then we have sentential semantics, which deals with how grammatical units are made using grammar. And we have also pragmatic studies, which goes beyond the text and goes beyond the sentences in order to study how meaning is created by the speakers within a particular context, and what are the effects of context and the contextual effects on creating meaning. These are very important things in order to study meaning. So we see that meaning is a bundle of very related and complicated things, and studying meaning is a very tough thing, as I told you before, and it necessitates the study of so many factors. It's not sufficient to study the meaning of words, the meaning of sentences. However, in our course, or in this chapter, or in this class, we're gonna talk about the semantics of meaning. And we said before that semantics is the scientific study of meaning per se, meaning outside context. Okay, let's go on with meaning and grammar. And in a previous video, I talked about grammar, and we said that it's the backbone of language, and it is made up of a number of mental rules which are stored in our brains. That these rules are very limited in number, but they are capable of producing an infinite number of sentences. And here's the miracle of grammar: how a limited number of rules allow us to produce an infinite number of sentences and utterances, which could be so creative and so new, so novel, and so on. Okay, we talked in a previous video on number, and we said that number as a category of grammar could be singular and plural, and in some languages we can have singular, plural, and dual. In other languages there are four number categories. And then we also talked about gender, and we differentiated between grammatical gender and biological gender. And we also differentiated between gender, which is a grammatical concept, and sex, which is a biological concept. And we said that there is no correlation between the two concepts, and we find that many languages separate or these two concepts all together, and categorize gender outside the area of sex and outside the area of the biology of human bodies. Okay. Also, one of the categories of grammar is tense, and today we're gonna talk about tense. And tense is how grammars tackle or express time. So as we're gonna see, let's talk about time and tense. Okay, tense is a grammatical concept. Tense is a grammatical concept, and time is not a grammatical concept at all. They are two different things. But let me talk about time first. Time is something that's related to physics, that's related to psychology, and time is a very important element and very important concept in our life, because it is a fundamental element of our existence. And imagine our life without time, it is in time that we are born, and it is in time that we live, and it is in time that we die, and it is in time that we build civilizations and move and make activities and populate the earth and a lot of things. Okay, so without time, this is the context in which the envelope in which we live. This is why humans have been so sensitive to time, and we can say that time sensing is one of the characteristics of human beings. We are born with this characteristic, that we have special sensitivity to time. Also, our human language has a very key characteristic, as we studied in chapter 2, if you remember, that it allows us to talk about things beyond the here and the now. And this is what we call displacement. How we talk about the future, although we are living in present. How we talk about the past. How we talk about places where we have never been before. How we talk about imaginative places, and so on. This is a very key characteristic of human language that allows us to really create imagination and have imagination and thinking and building epistemology and thinking of our ontology and our existence as human being. Okay, so we have to emphasize the idea that time is something and tense is something else. Time is an aspect, is not an aspect of language. It's an aspect of physics and psychology. And in physics, for example, it's an issue that time is an issue that has intrigued the physicists since the dawn of history. And we find that there are many theories which tackle the idea of time, and it's compounded. Time is being compounded with space and motion. Some physicists say that time doesn't exist and it is an illusion, and there is nothing called the present and past and future, and so on. We find, for example, this is a quote by Albert Einstein, who says that this is a very interesting quote. When you sit with a nice girl for 2 hours, it seems like 2 minutes. And when you sit on a hot stove for 2 minutes, it seems like 2 hours. That's relativity. So here time, as psychologists say, time is subjective. So time is relative. And thinking about time is a very interesting thing. Also, philosophers and the philosophy, time has been the main preoccupation in the field of philosophy. And we have so many disciplines. One of them is eternalism, which is that time exists and it's really real. And we have other theories, such as presentism, which is that time is it's only present time that is real, and there is nothing called future, at least, and the past is something that has gone and it's no longer existing, and what is real is the present time moment. It's now. Okay, so also psychology. In psychology, we have something called psychological time. In literature, we find that time has been intriguing writers and novelists and poets and literary men, general artists. And why? Because time is the envelope in which we live. It's the very key component of our existence as human being. So how do languages deal with this? How do languages express this very essential and existential element of time? We find that some languages use tense, which is a grammaticalization of time. Okay, tense is the is a grammatical device which places the action in time. Okay, tense is most often marked on verbs, not all, but it's not always, and it expresses how time relations are there. So again, time is not a grammatical concept. Tense is a grammatical concept whose its main function is to mark time in language, how to express time in language, how to express time in grammar, how to embed the expression of time in grammar, as we're gonna see. Okay, let's move to another element, which is cutting the flow of time. Of course, this is something metaphorical, because but for the sake of convenience, people have thought of cutting up the flow of time into at least three main domains. And now, which is present, and before now is past, and after now is future. Um, so here, these are the three main domains of time. But here, if you look at the past and if you look at the future, you can have an infinite number of slices of time. You can say yesterday, the day before, last week, last month, last year, last century, in 2002, in 2003, and it's an infinite number of time expressions in the past. Or equally in the future, you can have an infinite and unlimited number of time expressions in the future. So this allows us to cut the time and the flow of time into pieces in order to use these pieces as reference time, reference points when we do activities, in order to know when exactly such an activity has been done, is done, will be done, etc. Okay? And this makes us move to another important thing, which is that we don't have one temporal time. We have something called speech time, which is the time at which we am speaking. Number two, reference time, which refers to when exactly this happens. And number three, event time. Event time. So we have three elements of time, three temporal forms of time, or points in time. Number one, speech time, ST, R time, reference time, which is RT, and event time, which is ET. Let's look at some examples to illustrate this point. Tim is playing in the garden. Here you find that what's the speaking time? It's now. What is the reference time? Also, it's now. It's the present. The action is taking place now. Reference time, point of time is now. And number three, the event of time is also taking place now. So here we find that ST or RT is the same time as ST. All are occurring at the same point of time, which is now. Okay? And now let's move back to another point. Yes, I want to come back to this. Let's look at Tim went on a holiday last year. Okay, what is the time of speaking? It's now. I'm talking about something now that took place last year. And what is the time of event? What's the time of event? It took place last year. And what is the reference time? The point to which I refer to, it is last year. So last year is both the event time and the reference time. And now it is the time of my speaking, because this is the idea of displacement. Our language allows us to talk about things beyond the here and the now, things that took place in the past, and will probably take place in the future. Okay? More examples. Look at this. Sam had finished his presentation before he went home. Here we have, let's see, what is the event here? Sam has finished his presentation, okay? And what's the speaking time? It's now. I'm talking about this now. And what's the reference time? It's when, at that a particular time, when or before he went home. Before he went home, this is the reference time. He finished this and then he went home. Look at this. When Tony arrives, okay, Tony will be writing his assignment. This is, I'm talking about this now, and this event will take place in the future, this event time, and the reference time here is also very relatable. Usually the reference time and the event time are occurring at the same time. So reference time and event time. Okay, so what is the reference time here? It's in the future. Okay, it's in the future, and the event time will take place the event will take place at a particular point in the future, and I'm talking about it now. Okay, and here we have a table illustrating the concept, two interrelated concepts: the concept of tense and the concept of aspect. Okay, let me explain to you what's tense. Tense is a grammatical device, as we said before, that places the action in time. We can have present and past. Also, aspects, but on the other hand, is the represents the perspective or the point of view of how the event temporarily goes: imperfective, perfective, or complete, or ongoing, or incomplete. What does this mean? The idea of aspect refers to the point of view or the angle from which I look at the event to see if the event is complete, perfect, or incomplete, progressive. So when I say he's eating, it's not a perfect action, it's not complete, so I use the progressive here. So the progressive aspect is the key element here because it tells me that the action is not complete yet. And when I say he has finished, this perfect tense, present perfect tense, which means that action has already finished, and therefore the aspect here is the perfective aspect, perfective aspect, and the imperfective things which are in progress, not complete yet. Okay. So here we find simple, progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive. Past and present and past. We have present, simple, and here we find what we call tense. How tense is marked on verbs. Okay, because English is one of the languages which mark tense on verbs. Okay, so we have as, we have here we have ed, and in the future we have the modal verb will, and so on. In the progressive we have verb to be, and we have the ing. These are tense markers which are attached to the verb walk. Here we have tense markers. This is why we have English, in English we have markers which are attached to verbs. In other languages, the tense markers are not necessarily attached to verbs, as we're gonna see. In perfect, we have has or have as the tense markers, and also the ed. In progressive, we have has and have and been and and ing. All except walk are called tense markers. So what is tense? Tense it refers to the markers and indication that grammar use in order to mark time, in order to put an action in time, in order to place an action in time. Okay, so here we have three main you can say tenses. We're gonna talk about future tense because according to many people, English has only present tense and past tense, But here, if you assume that this is right, we can say that we have three major tenses and we have four aspects. So if you say 3 by 4, we get 12 different tenses. Of course, this is controversial. You can have more than that, and you can have fewer than that. And this is something that is open for argumentation and speculation among linguists and grammarians. Okay? The question is, this is very important. How do languages talk about time? How languages talk about time? And here we have, let me go back. Yes, excuse me. And here we have two categories of languages. We have a language which use time distinction words and expressions only, and they don't have tense. They don't have tense. And they do not attach time markers on verbs like English, ed, ing, and verb to be, and verb to have, and so on. All these are not there. So the first category of languages are languages which use only time expressions. Time expressions. Time such as tomorrow, yesterday, at the moment, ago, next, last, and no, in 19, in anything, and then within, and at, and on, and all these are expressions of time. We have an example here, which is Chinese. In Chinese, they say, I go to school, I go to school tomorrow, I go to school yesterday, I go to school today. So here, what makes or what expresses time here is not tense, because the verb here is the same. It doesn't exist. It doesn't carry any markers. It remains as it is. And what expresses time here are word expressions. Word expressions. Tomorrow, yesterday, today, etc. So Chinese is a tenseless language, and we'll find so many languages working the same. So we can have languages without tense. Tense is not necessary. Tense is not necessary in many languages, and they can work without it. They can do without it. So here, grammar has nothing to do with tense. Doesn't in the grammar of such languages, there is nothing called tense. Verb is put as it is. It doesn't change. It doesn't carry inflections. It doesn't carry morpheme. It doesn't carry it doesn't have any auxiliaries attached to it. It remains as it is, and time is expressed, as you see, by means of word expressions such as tomorrow, yesterday, today, etc., etc., etc. Okay. And we have another category of languages which mark tense in grammar. Grammar has a very important category in these languages. It is tense. Tense is a very important category of grammar in such languages. Here we find, for example, they use expression. They are called tense markers. عندهم حاجتين, two things, using time distinction words plus tense markers. For example, I went to school yesterday. Here I have a time expression which is yesterday, and also I have some change in the verb. Because the verb here is in the past tense, as we know in English, with regular verbs we add ed or ied or just d. And in irregular verbs such as go, we find that there is a change in the verb from go to went and so on. Here we find I will go to school yesterday. So I will go to school tomorrow. Here tomorrow is a word, time expression, and also we find go. It remains the same, and will is attached to it. And here makes the idea of that. English doesn't have people who argue that English doesn't have a future tense. They say that go remains the same here, and as long as it remains the same, so we don't have a future tense. And how about well? Well here is a verb, that modal verb that's used in order to supplement, in order to add, to assist in making the meaning of future. Okay, I had gone to school when my father called me yesterday. Okay, so here we have the past perfect. We have the verb here, instead of go we have gone, so there is a change on the verb, and also we have another auxiliary, so we and also we have yesterday, so this is a time expression, and we have tense. So English uses both time expression and the tenses on the verb, or tense markers on the verb. I have been to Paris. I have been to Paris. Here we find that. Sorry, let me go back. Here we find that there is no time indication here, but we don't have time time expressions such as yesterday or tomorrow, but we can indicate time by the tense have been here, which is the present perfect, illustrates that the action took place in the past, but we do not care when exactly it happened, and that's why we use the present perfect tense. So in the absence of word markers or time expressions such as yesterday or tomorrow, we find that we can figure out the time frame of the action by looking at the tense in which the verb is conjugated. Okay, very interesting point. So here time distinct can be embedded in English, embedded firmly in the grammar of a language, and the language that does this has a category of tense. So in English grammar, we have a category which is called tense, a grammatical category which is called tense. In Chinese, we don't have this because Chinese doesn't mark time on verbs like English doesn't have tense to mark time, and it depends only on time words or time expressions to communicate time and to talk about time and to place events and actions in time. Okay, the question is how many tenses? This is a very interesting question because we can have languages which have only 2 tenses, and we have other languages which have up to 11 tenses. One of them is a West African language where we have 5 different degrees of remote past tenses, and we also have 5 different degrees of remoteness in the present, in the future, as well as present tense. So we have a present tense and 5 future tenses and 5 past tenses. So the total is 11 tenses, and this means that human languages can. And look at this. This is what we mean by aspects. What we mean by aspects, and how human languages can cut up time flow into so many different slices. We can have so many kinds of past, so many kinds of future, and this is similar to some extent in to English. We have a past simple, we have past perfect, we have past continuous, we have past perfect continuous, and past and so on. But here the number of tenses in such a West African language is really amazing, really amazing. Okay. Then we have, let's look in detail on the tenses in English. And this is a controversial topic, as I told you, because some people or grammarians say that English has only 2 tenses, and there are traditionally called past tense and present tense. And the English has no future tense. And how do they say that? They say that as long as in the future the verb doesn't have a mark in itself, it doesn't change, such as go and went, no, and as long as it remains as it is, so we don't have a future tense. But doesn't mean that English cannot talk about the future. Actually, there are so many ways to talk about the future in English. For example, we can use the present simple to talk about the future. He is to American next week. We can use the present continuous. I'm leaving to Cairo next week. We can use the expression be plus going to. We can use will and shall and so on. Also, we can use past tense to talk about the future. For example, it could rain, it might rain, and also we can use the past tense in hypothetical present time. So if I were rich, I would do so and so and so on. So there is no correlation between tense and time. You can use past tense to talk about the future, as we saw in I could do so and so, I would, and etc. And we can have what we call the historical present to talk about things that took place in the past, in history. And we can say, for example, Shakespeare writes a number of sonnets. Shakespeare wrote it in the past, but this is historical present. So the idea of correlating tense and aspects is so it's really mind-blowing and very provocative, and because it's so ambivalent, and so on. Also, we can use the past tense to talk about future things, to express politeness. For example, could I help? Could I? Would I do something? Should I? And all these things. So it's not a matter of just time. No, tense can be used in order to express a lot of things related to modality. For example, expressing your attitudes, your politeness, giving permissions, taking permission, making requests, and all these things. Okay. Marking tense or nouns. I told you before that most of the languages which grammaticalize tense use this on verbs. And why verbs? Because, as I say, a verb is a little drama. The verb is a core part in a sentence, because when you mention a verb, you mention an action, and you mention the doer of the action, and you mention the participants who are affected by the action, and you mention the place, and you mention time. So a verb is a little drama. A verb is a whole story with all participants, with place, with time, and so on. So it's very natural and very justifiable to find most of the languages which have tense to mark tense on verbs. However, this is not the case in all languages. We can find languages which mark tense on nouns. For example, we have a language in Bolivia which is called the Movima, where we have tense marked on nouns rather than verbs. Also, we have another language in an indigenous language in California, which is called Hopa, and it is marking tense also on nouns rather than verbs. For example, the word house has three tenses. House is a noun, and it has three tenses. For example, present tense house which exists now, it's called Honta. A house which is in ruins, which doesn't exist, it's in the past, it's called Hontanin. And a house which is not built yet, there will be a house in the future, and it's called Tate. Okay, it's a nice distinctions of time and tense, and the idea of of time is fascinating, and languages do fascinating things in order to express this very existential and ambivalent concept of time. Okay, then we move to we conclude from this that whether a language has 11 tenses, 3 tenses, 2 tenses, or even no tenses at all, it is because having the slightest difficulty in talking about any desired point of time, past, present, future. This is a very important principle, regardless of whether languages have tenses or not. Human beings or speakers of languages do not have any problem or any difficulty to talk about time, to talk about the past, the future, to talk about the present. This is a miraculous thing in human languages. And we can say that all languages can express things like the Tuesday before last at 9:30 tomorrow morning, or in the year 1453. They differ only in the amount of grammatical detail. Look at this. They differ only in the amount of grammatical detail they glow onto the verb or elsewhere to help express these notions. So we have languages which glow or attach grammatical details such as prefixes and such as suffixes and some changes and the conjugations of verbs to indicate time, such as English. And we have verbs which do not mark any grammatical detail on the verb, and they leave the verb as it is, such as Chinese, and mark time using time expressions such as yesterday, today, tomorrow, next week, etc. Okay, so broadly speaking, and this is a very important principle, broadly speaking, anything that can be expressed in one language can be expressed in another language. This important observation is sometimes called the principle of affability. It's a principle of affability, which said that no, it's a mess to say that there is a language which is more sophisticated than another language, and the speakers of a particular language are mentally more sophisticated than speakers of another language. No, this is a mess, and something that is no longer holding, because it constitutes a stark prejudice and discrimination against some languages and against the speakers of these languages, which is no longer acceptable, and it's against all rules of respecting everyone's language and everyone's grammar, or the grammar of everyone's language, because this is the way languages vary, and what's common among languages is so greater than what differs and what differentiates human languages. So this is the idea of affability, which is that any language can express any thought, any attitude, any concept, any idea, and there are no differences. There are no differences among languages in this regard. However, we find that some languages do not agree with the principle of affability, and they think that languages affect the way we think and shapes the way we see the world. And this is what we're gonna talk about, inshallah, next time. This is the end of part 2, and enjoy your time and don't be tense. And goodbye.